So many thanks for inviting me to speak here today. Much of this talk has been inspired by an AHRC project that I'm about to complete, which has been exploring the role of the participative arts for people living with a dementia. As part of this project, I recently asked a group of schoolboys about how they felt before embarking on a collaboration with a group of people who are living with a dementia. And one lad said, and with the assent of all the others, I was very apprehensive because you see how some dementia patients are portrayed on television and in the movies. This comment clearly indicates the power of media representation and the extent to which these influence general perceptions and even interactions with people who are living with a dementia. But first, the title of this talk. This was inspired by a Raymond Carver short story. The short story is called What We Talk About When We Talk About Love. In the short story, a group of friends who are drunk on gin start discussing love. The more they try to define it, the less they can agree on what it is. Like love, dementia is a very difficult concept. It can't easily be contained by language, and it's rather resistant to definition. A number of scholars have outlined how until around 1988, stories about dementia were avoided. After all, these stories involve older people and sickness, which is or was not considered an especially award-winning combination for publishers, Hollywood, or the West End. However, interestingly, even amongst gerontologists, dementia was not often focused on. When I completed my MSc in gerontology, it was certainly not obligatory to study or talk about dementia. At this time, the specialism of old age psychiatry was still relatively new. Indeed, this specialty was only formally recognised within the NHS in 1989. The cultural and social landscape has radically altered since then and has most rapidly changed in the last decade. Most people now have a sense about the work of old age psychiatrists, and we are inundated by a rash of films, plays, novels, and even operas that represent dementia. At the same time, we have dementia friends, dementia-friendly communities, dementia champions, and even a dementia challenge. This is not to mention the fairly recent G8 summit that focused on galvanizing global action on dementia. Perhaps most importantly, people with dementia and their carers are beginning to speak for and represent themselves. Terry Pratchett has famously described his dementia as an embuggeration. Throughout this presentation, I'm going to use the umbrella term dementia, but also Alzheimer's disease where this is relevant. The words dementia or Alzheimer's evoke strong feelings. They have become heavily value-laden terms. In popular discourse, they are often confounded and are mostly associated with older people. Both may be understood as semiotic concepts that are the locus of many meanings and emotional resonances. Even in contemporary medical and scientific texts, dementia is conceptually slippery. It resists definition. Dementia and Alzheimer's disease cannot easily be defined because both have been subject to subtly changing psychiatric, biomedical, and social and cultural stories. This is not to deny, of course, that they represent real biological illnesses. However, on a conceptual level, the terms are open to interpretation. This is exemplified by the new DSM-5 that came out kind of late last year. It's a diagnostic and statistical manual of medical disorders, mental disorders even. And this indicates that Alzheimer's disease is a heterogeneous set of conditions rather than a single event. This profound lack of clarity about what dementia or Alzheimer's disease might be arouses what Susan Sontag aptly named old-fashioned kinds of dread. As Sontag lucidly demonstrates in her discussion of cancer and TB, any disease or condition whose causality is murky and for which medical treatment is ineffectual excites particular horror. The disease then becomes a metaphor and is also used as an adjective to describe all that is pernicious or morally or socially pernicious. Dementia has replaced cancer as the scourge of modern times. The discourses of the scientific community reinforce this pervasive sense of horror about dementia and Alzheimer's disease. For example, the prevalence of dementias are described in dramatic terms as an epidemic and a crisis. The economic burden of the disease is often noted, and Alzheimer's disease is frequently referred to as a plague. Even references to amyloid plaques and tau tangles by scientists fuel the perception of dementia as a knotty problem that is out of individual control. The neurologist Lees describes plaques in profoundly metaphorical terms as resembling sepia galactic storms. Scientific discourse has also focused on the molecular war on amyloid. So this is just to indicate that the language of medical science is not neutral, and it's echoed by the wider cultural stories that we tell. One of the ways that I have approached the question of what we mean when we talk about dementia is to explore the metaphors that are persistently connected with dementia and Alzheimer's disease. Metaphors are a feature of all languages. So we have blue sky thinking, the tapestry or the journey of life, and we turn to metaphor when attempting to explain difficult concepts, like love. Similarly, the language of politics is loaded with metaphor. Rising tides are often linked with dementia by contemporary politicians and journalists. Thus, David Cameron recently referred to the need for Britain to change its attitude to the rising tide of people suffering with dementia, which rather strangely, or perhaps aptly, echoes the language of Thatcher, who in 1978 referred to the epidemic of mental impairment that was rising like a tide. Equally, the silent tsunami of dementia has been a dominant watery image in many news stories. I think the notion of floods is curiously biblical. Indeed, both nature imagery and biblical allusion, and often an interesting mixture of the two, pepper the language that is often used about dementia. Thus, the Express newspaper referred to dementia as a millennium demon and the need for a crusade to overcome it. Here, religion and war are neatly juxtaposed. The emphasis is on faith and battle, on something that is metaphysical but can also be won. The overall impression is of dementia as huge and ancient, beyond our grasp or understanding, that can only be understood through reference to massive natural phenomena or in biblical and mythic terms. The powerful animation of dementia as a primeval monster or bogeyman continues to dominate political speeches about dementia, and it follows that people living with a dementia are depicted as victims, and that dementia is indissolubly linked with death, or more precisely, a living death. Connected with this is the vision of the Dementors. These feature in Harry Potter 4 and 5, and I quote, "Dementors are among the foulest creatures that walk this earth. They drain peace, hope, and happiness out of the air around them. Get too near a Dementor, and every good feeling, every happy memory will be sucked out of you. You will be left with nothing but the worst experiences of your life." Another recurring linguistic device is the reliance on military and warlike metaphors, so the dementia time bomb crops up frequently. Thus, dementia and war, and perhaps above all this nebulous war on terror, are yoked together. On the other hand, the press and television documentaries abound in personal stories about dementia, and these reports are prolific. For the most part, they concentrate on the extraordinary. Thus, Louis Theroux's documentary, Extreme Love, Dementia, focused on individuals living in a care home. The care home was called the Beatitudes, in Phoenix, Arizona. This betrayed the same tendency found in tabloid media to highlight the oddities of those living with a dementia. These accounts all present us with an outside view. We, the audience, are in the position of witnesses or even judges to something that is totally alien, a bit like the guided tours that used to take place around lunatic asylums in the Victorian era. Thus, although we seem to be connecting with individual stories about dementia, the net effect is to create an even greater sense of distance between us and them. Dementia, as it's represented by popular media, has a paradoxical nature. It is both a horribly active disease, a killer, and yet one that simultaneously renders its victims passive and inert. Similarly, we, society, medics and scientists, are rendered powerless in the face of its inevitable and insidious approach. An exploration of some of the metaphors that frame dementia has led me to wonder about the extent to which dementia has become a metaphor in itself. A rather simplistic equation has developed. Dementia equals a complex, unknowable world of doom, aging, and a fate worse than death. After all, dementia brings together a heady combination of anxiety about old age and mental illness. It makes sense then that for some writers and directors, dementia, or more precisely, the exploration of dementia through a central character or situation, has been a means of questioning politics, social mores, morality, and indeed the nature of our humanity. The 1988 film High Hopes by Mike Leigh and the 2011 film A Separation by Ashghar Farhadi both have older parents with dementia at the core of the action. This, of course, is a still from Mike Leigh's film. In both films, the dementia of the older characters operates as a lens through which we see ourselves. Mrs. Bender, the older lady, is central to High Hopes. She's an older woman who is clearly having problems with her memory and her functioning, although the term Alzheimer's disease is never used in the film. Throughout the film, we witness the extent to which Mrs. Bender is an inconvenience to those around her. Mrs. Bender's dementia and how it makes others react is a metaphor in this film for all that is wrong with society. Its steady disintegration into a race to accumulate wealth, an obsession with surface appearances, and the ways in which this can lead to a neglect of our humanity. At the end of the film, however, it is Mrs. Bender's vulnerabilities that lead to a transcendent moment. In this last scene, she is taken up onto the roof of her tower block by her son and his partner, and they share a view of London. Their common humanity is evident, and similarly, we are shown that caring behaviour is humanising. The logic of the film is that dementia may happen, but that what matters, what defines our humanity, is how we react to these occurrences. I'm going to have to race through this film. It's Ashghar Farhadi's film Separation. It has marked similarities to High Hopes, above all the social realist kind of vein in which it's written. As in High Hopes, the dementia of an older relative exposes the failings of a society that provides no adequate care for vulnerable citizens. A key moment is at the beginning of this film when Simin, who's a wife, rebukes her husband Nadir for his devotion to his father. She says, "He doesn't remember who you are." And Nadir retorts, now you can see him, "But I remember that he is my father." So both of these films then invite us to appreciate the complexities that abound in caring for someone with dementia, and also to see it as a political issue. Above all, we are never simply privileged outsiders looking at the pathologies of an illness. I don't have time to talk about The Fear, but this was a primetime television series in which the older character is also living with a dementia, and in which his dementia is allied with a kind of criminal underclass in ways which are fascinating. And finally, a play by Trevor T. Smith, which is called An Evening with Dementia. And I'm just going to quote from that play. "And I'm suffering from dementia, am I? It's everywhere. It's a demented society. Everyone is terrified. We've all forgotten something. We've forgotten the most important thing. We've lost the memory of our humanity." So concluding thoughts. I'm still not entirely sure what we mean when we talk about dementia, but I think it's clear that the word has come to mean many, often conflicting things, and that it has achieved an almost symbolic relevance. I asked a group of care home staff that I've been working with about the words they commonly use to describe the people they work with who are living with a dementia. And without a moment's hesitation, they supplied the following list: doolally, nutters, fruitcakes, lost their marbles, and they referred to themselves as bum wipers. This lexicon is so familiar that it's not shocking. People with Alzheimer's disease or with a dementia are reductively described by pejorative adjectives. However, in High Hopes, A Separation, and Smith's monologue, dementia is not simply a private problem. Rather, it's a social issue that affects and reflects upon us all. After all, to tell stories about dementia and those who live with it is also to reveal who we really are. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Yes, the gentleman at the back. If you just wait for the microphone to arrive.
I'm confused about the difference between Alzheimer's and dementia. Could you define them, please?
There's whole textbooks defining them, so I'm not the best person to, but from what I've understood, dementia is a syndrome, and it's an umbrella term covering a lot of different neurological disorders, whereas Alzheimer's disease is, in fact, the distinction between them has become much more cloudy since the new DSM-5, because Alzheimer's disease is also now defined as a heterogeneous set of symptoms. So it's very muddy, murky water. But originally, Alzheimer's disease referred to one particular form of dementia.
There's a question there.
Excuse me. Thank you for your talk. I'd like to hear you please talk about maybe if dementia around here. I'm from Brazil, and over there we hear that dementia and Alzheimer's are diseases that are affecting younger and younger people. Is that the case around here as well, or is it still very much connected to old age only?
I'm not a clinician, so I'm not qualified to answer who exactly now dementia's. I don't know if anybody else in the audience is, but I know there's increasingly a movement in this country to diagnose early onset dementia, and there's more and more a move in that direction, and that's aroused a lot of misgivings, certainly among the psychiatrists that I work with, who've written about the dangers of this.
Does that gentleman there have a question? And then wait, there's a gentleman there. Sorry. We just, sorry.
Don Brandt, you'd compared the sort of scary role of dementia now with the scary role of cancer, and it seems to me it took about 20 years, if not more, for that sort of sense of fear to go away, or at least to be reduced, and it was reduced largely because of gradual progress in medical treatment, and therefore a sense that you were living with cancer rather than suffering from it and dying from it. Do you have any sense of how quickly that same process might happen with dementia?
I'm sure that it would be a similar process, that once we know more about the conditions, there will be less fear associated with it. All I know from my research is that we're as far as ever away from any kind of pharmacological cure or even treatment that can prevent the worst symptoms associated with dementias. So at least another 20 years.
Professor Sophie?
That is very interesting, Hannah. As you know, there's been a lot of memoirs now written by people caring for those with dementia, which are incredibly interesting to read in terms of trying to beat back all those hideous metaphors, like Judith Levine caring for her father, in which she said finally she was able to feel close to her father, because even though he had serious dementia, he still responded to colour, to music, to dancing, and all the things they could now do together. Or Alex Kate Schulman, To Love What Is, where she again talks about how much she's able to share with her partner who has dementia. Or not Alex Kate Schulman, Eleanor Fuchs, in her account of her mother, The Last Exit or something, and she closes the book by saying, those final years, they were our best, you know, and the loving relationship she's able to develop with her mother in her final years of caring for her with dementia. But these are all people who get a lot of help with their caring work, a lot of help, and that's significant, you know.
Yeah.
They have the resources to be able, you know, to work with the creativity and richness which remains in the possibilities of continuing a relationship with such people.
Yes. Yeah, I think memoirs are fascinating, and I've written a little bit about memoirs in a chapter that's coming out. I'm also interested by Sally Magnusson's recent memoir, and she says a similar thing about the love that she feels for her mother. But there are social and political conditions.
One last question from the speaker there.
You mentioned dementia friends and dementia champions, and there's been a lot of work to reduce the stigma associated with dementia, and I think dementia is talked about and much more openly than it ever was. Have you got anything to say about the sort of trends in terms of, and some of what you were discussing is to do with stigma. Do you think there has been any movement in terms of reducing the stigma associated with dementia? Because there's been a lot of policy effort to do so.
Yeah, there's been a lot of those movements I kind of listed to begin with. All I can say is from my own experience, I've been very surprised by the amount of stigma that there still is. So I think we can now talk about dementia, which maybe didn't even happen in the early 80s. We now have words and we can kind of discuss it more openly. But I've been very surprised in my work at the amount of stigma, even just associated with the language.
Can I ask a really quick follow-up? Just
Sure.
how much of that stigma do you think is actually to do with age? That it's actually a confounding of stigma. It's not just dementia, it's age. It's a question.
Yeah, I think you're doubly marginalised if you're as an older person and also living with dementia. Yeah.
Thank you very much.